What happens to a nation when it loses its global superpower status? The UK has faced significant political and economic shifts following the Brexit referendum. Once a dominant empire controlling a quarter of the world's land and wealth, the UK joined the EU in 1973, seeking to maintain its relevance. However, in 2016, it made a dramatic turn toward independence, fueled by promises of empowerment and a return to global prominence. We explore the UK's journey from an imperial superpower to a nation facing an uncertain future post-Brexit. We examine the high expectations and harsh realities that have emerged, and we also scrutinize the leadership landscape, as 6 political leaders have pledged to make Brexit work, yet arguably contributed to a perception of the UK's declining credibility on the global stage. Can the UK reclaim its position, or is it now grappling with the specter of irrelevance? Was Brexit an attempt to recapture the nostalgic glory of UK's imperial past? From global empire to modern superpower, a brief history of Britain's rise. The British Empire's colonial expansion began in the late 16th and early 17th centuries and reached its global powerhouse status by the 19th century. India. The British East India Company started trading in India in the early 1600s. By 1858, the British Crown assumed direct control. Australia. Colonized as a penal colony in 1788, Australia became a significant source of wool and gold by the mid-19th century. Canada. The British presence in Canada began with the establishment of Newfoundland in 1583 and expanded with the settlement and military conquest of other regions. Africa. British control in Africa started with the establishment of trading posts in the 17th century. Strategic points like Egypt for the Suez Canal were controlled by the mid-19th century, and valuable colonies like South Africa for diamonds and gold were acquired by the late 19th century. Industrial Revolution. The late 18th century brought innovations like the steam engine and textile machinery, fueling Britain's economic dominance and setting the stage for global influence. Naval power. The Royal Navy, epitomized by the phrase "Britannia rules the waves," was a cornerstone of British power. The defeat of Napoleon's fleet at the Battle of Trafalgar in 1805 cemented its naval supremacy. 20th century challenges. The world wars of the 20th century strained Britain's resources and accelerated the decline of its empire. The post-World War II era saw the independence of countries like India, Ghana, and Kenya, signaling the end of colonial expansion. EU membership. In 1973, the UK's strategy shifted towards economic and diplomatic ties within Europe. Membership in the EU provided access to a large single market and a new platform for political influence. Modern superpower status until Brexit. Though no longer an empire, the UK remains a significant global player. Its economy, cultural influence, and military capabilities, including its status as a permanent member of the United Nations Security Council and a key NATO member, ensure its continued relevance in global affairs. The road to Brexit, a turning point in British history. Brexit aimed to reclaim national sovereignty and redefine Britain's global standing, focusing on 4 key objectives: sovereignty and borders. Addressing concerns over lost national control, Brexit sought to restore the UK's authority over its borders and laws, particularly in response to issues like unwanted migration. Cultural continuity, emphasizing the preservation of Britain's cultural identity. The movement aimed to regain control over immigration to protect the nation's heritage. Economic control. Advocates believed that leaving the EU would free the UK from EU regulations and financial obligations, allowing for trade deals that better suit Britain's interests. Status and strategy. Brexit was seen as a chance to revive Britain's historical status as a global force, with the belief that EU membership had diluted its influence. What was promised and what was delivered? Agriculture and food industry. Brexit advocates claimed the idea that farming will collapse after Brexit is absurd, yet the reality has been starkly different, with some admitting now to a farming disaster. Brexit admits many farmers will go out of business due to EU exit. The agricultural and food industry has struggled with increased costs, trade barriers, and the loss of tariff-free access to the EU market, severely impacting profitability and viability. The agricultural turmoil even made it to the British dinner table. Headlines like "Tomato-free pizza on UK menus as chefs choke on the price of fruit and veg" highlight the effects of Brexit on everyday life. The cost of tomatoes had skyrocketed at the beginning of 2023, forcing restaurants to adapt by creating tomatoless versions of pizzas and pasta dishes. This is a stark contrast to the promise of cheaper food post-Brexit, as consumers now face rising costs and the reality of an 80% increase in the cost of British food in just 1 year. Fishing industry impact. One of the rallying cries for Brexit was the promise of reclaiming control over British fishing waters. More reason to leave. Brexit Britain to take back control of its fishing waters. This prospect appealed to many as a symbol of restored sovereignty and potential economic revival. The expectation was that by leaving the EU, the UK would regain exclusive rights to its maritime resources, leading to a resurgence in the fishing industry. Instead, headlines such as "We didn't vote for this," "Fishing collapse as UK firms go bust and exporters flee to EU" capture the stark contrast between promise and outcome. The anticipated economic revival has turned into a struggle for survival, with new trade barriers and the loss of seamless access to the EU market leading to increased costs and operational difficulties. Consumer impacts. Healthcare strain. Brexit was supposed to bring significant benefits for the NHS, with claims like, if you vote for Brexit, you will get NHS money, new jobs, and repatriation of the illegals. However, the reality has been markedly different, with ongoing challenges highlighted by headlines such as "People pulling their own teeth amid NHS dental crisis." The strain on healthcare services has been exacerbated by staffing shortages, longer wait times, and disruptions in supply chains, leading to medication shortages. Immigration paradox. Contrary to the promise of stricter control over immigration, reports like "UK sets an immigration record as Brexit was never about stopping illegal immigrants" show that the UK has set an immigration record, contradicting the notion that Brexit would curb immigration. "I will make Brexit work," a promise made by 6 different UK leaders in 8 years that doomed a nation. Brexit has been steered by a succession of leaders, each pledging to make it work, yet often appearing to serve their own political agendas. This has contributed to a perceived decline in Britain's power and credibility on the global stage. Theresa May, Prime Minister 2016 to 2019. May's tenure was characterized by her steadfast commitment to delivering Brexit. Despite her promise to make it work, her approach led to political gridlock, weakening Britain's negotiating position and ultimately resulting in her resignation without fulfilling her Brexit promise. Jeremy Corbyn, Leader of the Opposition, 2015 to 2020. As the leader of the Labour Party during Brexit negotiations, Corbyn's ambiguous stance was criticized for contributing to a lack of a clear alternative vision, which some argue prolonged the uncertainty amid political turmoil. Boris Johnson, Prime Minister 2019 to 2022. Johnson's tenure was marked by his bold promise to get Brexit done, which secured him a decisive election victory. However, his single-minded pursuit of Brexit has been criticized for prioritizing political triumph over the country's long-term interests, straining relationships with key allies and trading partners. Keir Starmer, Leader of the Opposition, 2020 to present. Taking over the Labour leadership from Corbyn, Starmer has focused on holding the government accountable for its Brexit handling, advocating for a more pragmatic approach to the UK's relationship with the EU and aiming to bridge the divide left by his predecessor. Liz Truss, Prime Minister 2022. Truss's brief tenure was characterized by her efforts to address the cost of living crisis and her rejection of proposals for a windfall tax on energy companies. Despite her ambitious policies, her approach faced criticism for not adequately addressing workers' rights and the NHS, ultimately leading to her swift exit from office. Rishi Sunak, Prime Minister 2022 to present. Sunak, succeeding Truss, has committed to making Brexit work while focusing on stabilizing the economy and addressing the challenges left by his predecessors. His tenure represents a continued effort to navigate the complexities of Brexit and its aftermath. Each leader's tenure has been a chapter in the ongoing saga of Brexit, with promises to make it work often overshadowed by political maneuvering and short-term gains. The search continues for a leader who can successfully navigate the intricacies of Brexit while genuinely prioritizing the nation's long-term prosperity and international standing. Once commanding a quarter of the world's land and wealth, Britain sought a new route to sustaining relevance by joining the EU in 1973, only to pivot sharply towards independence again as the Brexit referendum erupted decades later amidst promises of empowerment. Yet, departure from European structures has delivered sobering realities for an island accustomed to unmatched global sway. Trade barriers, migrant strains, even farming crises have ensued. Belaying aspirations, a liberated Britain would seamlessly regenerate its standing. The key takeaway is clear. The UK's future prosperity and global standing hinge on its ability to navigate the complexities of Brexit and adapt to the new realities it faces. Does the UK's future require a re-evaluation of its relationship with the EU? And is rejoining it a viable or necessary option to regain its global stature?